adaptation to the fake domain's DNS servers as was done for the web page payloads. Since the bad guys own the fake domain, they can add as many arbitrary robot name servers for the domain as they like. This extra indirection makes tracking down the criminals nearly impossible. In the time it takes law enforcement to track down the robot that Grandpa's computer was just looking at, not only have the DNS and content servers changed, but the entire underlying infrastructure of the criminal network has changed. Since these dynamics are also infinitely scalable, enough layers of indirection can be used that traditional end-user protections, such as blacklisting, are virtually ineffective. Fortunately, we haven't seen this technique used that much in the wild yet. At this point, simple bulletproof hosting is still reasonably effective. Still, FastFlux works well for those who are using it, and it is available to the broader criminal community whenever they're ready for it. In order to effectively combat this new tactic, unprecedented levels of action and cooperation are going to be required between registrars, ISPs, and the security community. This list, by the way, enumerates a bunch of mitigation options that have been suggested by the nonprofit cybersecurity group called the HoneyNet Project. It makes the challenge pretty clear because remember, ISPs and registrars both have a financial incentive not to act. The bad guys are paying customers, and taking them offline just because somebody else might complain is not something they're very fond of thinking about. Summing up, FastFlux puts traditional phishing and iframe attacks on steroids. It uses manipulation of the DNS infrastructure to get massive numbers of concealed mercenary robots to do their bidding. A virtually untraceable network of resources completely under control of the bad guys. Okay, let's move on to some tipping points. At iDefense, we believe the cyber world has seen several recently. The impact of this is visible across the board. Cyber criminals are morphing into professional organizations. Religious extremists are using cyber fraud to help fund their agendas. Amateur hacker groups practice cyber espionage in the open in China. And cyber war has become a legitimate tool to accomplish political goals around the world. Cybercrime is evolving into big business. Illicit organizations have moved beyond dipping their toes in the water. They're beginning to find new and creative ways to branch out and protect their infrastructure. These cybercrime groups now inhabit the same type of space that drug cartels of the early 80s did. The modern cyber cartel is a durable, semi-formal criminal organization that thinks and operates like a business. Indeed, the best cyber cartels will become functionally almost indistinguishable from legitimate firms, with the exception being that they run a greater risk because they're doing something illegal. For almost 2 decades before the cartels, hackers operated independently or in loose, informal groups. Some of these groups remain, but they've been eclipsed in relevance. Several governments have begun taking the reins, utilizing public opinion to encourage DDoS attacks and site defacements, and reaching out through officially sanctioned programs to start building trained corps of cyber warriors as another paramilitary asset for political conflicts. The evidence for this is very strong in China, and we're starting to see equal hints in Russia. Even political and religious activism has found a home in cyberspace, establishing footholds on the web to spread propaganda and even contracting out for services to discredit and harass their ideological opponents. Cyber espionage groups have begun to discover that contract services can be pretty lucrative, turning them into cyber mercenaries. Okay, for the remainder of the presentation, I'll shift our gaze away from the here and now and start taking a peek over the horizon at what we believe are some important new technologies and phenomena that you may not be thinking about yet and probably should be. These are what we call security disruptors. You've all heard about business disruptors before, I'm sure. These are technologies or ideas that come around and fundamentally change how a particular business segment runs. Here are two examples. You've all probably seen this on the left, the combination of iTunes and iPods. They have changed how the music industry sells music. Before they came along, there were MP3 players and music sites, but they didn't make it convenient and cost-effective for people to use. This has fundamentally changed. On the right side is an example that's a little bit older. Before Gutenberg made his movable type printing press, reading and writing were something for the privileged elite. Gutenberg's process made it cheap and easy to reproduce the written word and completely changed the process of communicating ideas and preserving knowledge throughout the world. We believe that security disruptors exist also. These are the technologies and cultural phenomena which are evolving today that will have a cyberspace impact within the next 10 to 15 years. I want to talk about 4 specific examples real quick. The first is the invariable tendencies of governments to overreact through excessive legislation. Anyone who's filled out a handful of HIPAA acknowledgement forms at the doctor's or taken their shoes off for the TSA at an airport knows what I'm talking about. The security community regularly debates exactly what cyber terrorist attacks might look like, but iDefense defines them both by what they are and what they aren't. And it's generally agreed that there hasn't yet ever been a true act of cyber terrorism. But experts worry that there definitely will be one within the next 10 to 15 years. The security disruptor here is not the attack. It's the reaction to the attack, the tendency of governments to over-legislate something they don't yet properly understand. Let me see a quick show of hands. How many of you either know someone who has one of these or has one themselves? Okay, good. These are not your grandmother's cell phones. These are not your mother's cell phone. These are the tip of a very big iceberg. Mobile phones and PDAs have been around for years. All along, security pundits, including iDefense, have been claiming that this would be the year the criminals go after the mobile platforms. Until recently, there hasn't been any money in it. And the devices didn't have the kind of functionality or the connectivity to make them as valuable as a laptop or a desktop. This has all changed. Today's smartphone can do almost anything that a home computer can, and cheaper. Did you know, for example, that in Japan they've developed an iPhone app that lets you pay for things from a vending machine using your phone? In Brazil, there's a startup that's built an app that has 60,000 users already that essentially lets you use your phone like a credit card. You go into a store, you buy what you want to purchase, and it shows up on your phone bill at the end of the month. To paraphrase Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal, it is raining super smart phones. He was referring to the iPhone and the new spate of similar devices that have popped up around it. Ralph De La Vega, CEO of AT&T, called the iPhone a computer that just happens to also be a phone. These are no longer simple devices that do fancy things using SMS trickery. These are computer devices with real operating systems that have network connectivity and also happen to have a phone. Maybe more importantly, there is money to be had. The business world has finally cracked the code and